if you see somebody, or you don't see them actually in the room, go get them. No, that's all right. You come up.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm really excited to welcome this next panel because of not only that it's all women, but these are really incredible leaders in their own rights, in their own agencies and the work that they do. And I'm not going to try to do them justice with all of their lengthy bios and accomplishments, but I will just say how lucky I feel to have this group here and to be able to talk about the subjects that they're going to talk about. So without further ado, Yolanka and Raquel and Lori and Sarasina, please come on stage.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you for the introduction, and it is great to be here. I am so honored to get to moderate this panel, all women, and pink for October. So, and our photographer is pink as well. It's the Pink Month, Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Yes, so not only are we all women, but I am really honored to be on the stage with these three women in particular and to have this conversation. As I think you know, we are going to have a fireside chat, and we are talking about the role of federal and state government in the implementation of advanced air mobility, in particular looking at innovation and safety, but really that broader picture of what does this mean and how do we engage the different levels of government, what are their roles and responsibilities, and how do they fit into the ecosystem. I'm going to let each of you talk about your own positions and your background, but I'm going to quickly introduce you. So we have Sarasina Tuchen from USDOT. We have Raquel Girvin from the Western Pacific region of FAA, and Lori Pepper from CalSTA, not Caltrans, and you'll hear more about that. I'm Yolanka Wulff. I'm Executive Director of CAMI, the Community Air Mobility Initiative. Some of you were here yesterday when we did our AAM 101, and you'll have to pardon me for repeating what I said yesterday about who we are. So we are a nonprofit 501c3 organization. Our mission is to support the sustainable and responsible integration of advanced air mobility into daily transportation systems through education, communication, and collaboration. We work primarily with public agencies, planners, transportation, urban planners, airports, at the regional, state, local, tribal level, to educate about advanced air mobility and to collaboratively develop policies, best practices, and implementation pathways to the integration of aviation as a mode in a multimodal transportation system. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. Sarasina, you want to go first?
Hi, I'm Sarasina Tuchen. I'm with the U.S. Department of Transportation, but just from an organizational standpoint, I sit under the Office of the Secretary of Transportation, and for those of you that don't understand how the DOT works because it's very large, the Deputy Secretary of Transportation is Polly Trottenberg, and she manages all the operating administrations like the FAA, federal highways, federal roadways, federal transit, et cetera. On the other hand is the Undersecretary for Policy and Research, and that is Carlos Monier. And all the large policies and laws and research programs that are DOT-wide fall under him. So for example, the bipartisan infrastructure law and the recently enacted law called the AM Coordination and Leadership Act, which the DOT is leading. I'm actually a part of that. I'm the US DOT project lead for the automation strategy. I also I was selected into an office called the Highly Automated Systems Safety Center of Excellence under OST. We report actually directly to Congress and the chief science officer. And this is actually a new office that was stood up by Congress in 2020 for the American public. Congress doesn't agree to much, but they agreed to having a highly automated systems safety center of excellence to review, assess, and validate the safety of highly automated systems across the Department of Transportation. And they also agreed bipartisanly to sign the AAM Act. So we're in the middle of the CR, so I wanted to say that's significant because, it has bipartisan support. And so I'm, as I mentioned, I'm a part of a group of national experts across the country. And what's nice here is I couldn't travel to our AAM IWG quarterly. So I'm here in Monterey because actually this is my home. And so my heart is here, and my husband and I had always had a second home here. We were up in Silicon Valley as everybody else, and during the pandemic, we moved down here. And at the time, the last, 10 years, I was sitting actually at NASA Ames Research Center, helping them integrate automation technologies into the NAS. And actually very early on with AM and the start of Uber Elevate, I had done a lot of the initial papers on saying that this is a mode that is no longer, it's an aviation mode, absolutely, but it doesn't operate the same way as traditional aircraft, airport to airport. They were, the initial Uber Elevate video was about the air taxi, bypassing traffic before the pandemic, and all these new vertiport designs. And then that required a really seamless, multimodal, secure, safe, because it was bypassing traffic, low altitude with people. So a lot of the early papers were like, this is a different type of aviation, and now it's the inflection point where now aviation needs to be tied into our multimodal network. But moreover, our entire transportation system hasn't been redesigned since the Eisenhower era. So we have 5,028 general aviation airports that are underutilized, old bridges, old roadways, AM, electrification, AV, all these new converging technologies, including AI, are asking us, and the bill is helping with us, how can we redesign a new transportation system that is more equitable, sustainable, and safe? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Raquel Girvin. I am the FAA's regional administrator for the Western Pacific region. That involves Arizona, California, Hawaii, Nevada, and the U.S. territories in the Pacific. So it's a pretty vast and exciting region because there's a lot going on. And let's see, but before I took on this role, I've been at the FAA since 2007. Before that, I was an airplane engineer, and I've really enjoyed kind of working in all aspects of aviation and commercial space transportation because it is, like I said, it's just such a dynamic area. My team and I have a few roles for the FAA. One is horizontal integration across the agency. It's a very large agency, and sometimes when issues are sort of getting stuck in one line of business versus another, that's what we do, is to kind of make sure that we're all talking to each other and addressing issues collectively, both locally and of course coordinating at the national level as well. My office also spends a lot of time on community engagement on aviation issues, especially on areas where the FAA is actually taking specific action, airspace actions. But because of a lot of that experience, that is something that I'll be touching on a little bit more in this meeting. And then another thing we do is coordination with local, state, tribal governments, and again, kind of with a regional perspective. And because of all of those areas that we touch on, and actually I guess I'm gonna go ahead and add something with respect to STEM and aviation and space education, that's another area where our office is very heavily involved in. So for all those reasons, this is such a great event to get invited to, so I wanna thank the DART leadership, Josh and Sherry, for inviting me to have an opportunity to engage in this conversation. So I don't know if I should go ahead and jump into the FAA's role, or do I wait until you ask us that question?
If you want to wait, yes.
Yeah.
If you want to wait, that's fine.
Okay.
I'm going to come back, and I know you talked about it a little bit, but we can talk a little bit more about roles.
Okay, great. First of all, just picking off what Raquel ended with, just thank you so much to the Monterey DART team, as well as Yolanka, and of course, Raquel and Sarasina. I'm really excited to be up here on this panel specifically. So I'm with CalSTA, and if you were like me before I started working there, I had no idea what CalSTA was and how it was different than Caltrans. So CalSTA is the cabinet-level entity that oversees the 8 transportation-related departments. So we oversee Caltrans, DMV, CHP, high-speed rail, and 4 smaller offices. And my role within CalSTA is to be the Deputy Secretary for Innovative Mobility Solutions. So I work on all things technology and how to integrate that technology into the transportation ecosystem to make it easier for people and goods to move throughout the state. So I work on issues that include broadband deployment, connected and automated vehicles, road charge, the California Integrated Travel Project, ZEV infrastructure, and of course, advanced air mobility. And when it comes to advanced air mobility, we think that the state's role is fairly limited when it comes to direct authority, but it can be pretty impactful. And so within the state government, we have had various AAM-related exploratory efforts during the past years. However, what we don't have is a unified vision and guiding principles within which to actually frame those efforts. So a couple of years ago, CalSTA and Caltrans decided to lead an effort which officially started in June, to do just that through the creation of a 3-year prioritized work plan, as well as a feasibility and readiness study of the state's infrastructure to help establish just where do we stand today. And so during this effort and through future efforts, we expect to be able to focus the state's transportation investments to integrate AAM as a value add to the transportation ecosystem and its users, and not have it be just another layer of transportation. And so it's also important for the state to work closely with our local government and community partners. And some of our local governments have already been exploring and planning for potential incorporation of these services. However, there are many communities throughout California that are not as well resourced, and therefore may need some support to figure out if and how AAM might benefit their residents. So this means that the general public also has to see and feel a benefit to incorporating this technology into their communities. Exploring if or how the state may engage or support local government activities and decision-making is also a part of our current discussions. And there are many potential benefits we could realize through this technology. However, like we've seen through other new and emerging modes of transportation, as Sarasina mentioned, there are also potential negative impacts. And I know we always like to focus on the positive, but there needs to be an acknowledgement and awareness of past negative impacts as a result of transportation decisions generally, and specifically infrastructure-related decisions, in order for us to not repeat the same mistakes. So our underlying thought process throughout our current contract and effort is how can the state contribute to realizing the promised benefits of moving people and goods in a new way? And how can we also help mitigate some of the potential negative impacts that always come with integrating a new mode of transportation? So we're considering how the use of state and local authority through zoning and permitting of landing locations, like heliports, vertiports, pedestals, et cetera, to ensure that these vehicles help us to achieve our state goals for climate, mobility, and others as they move both people and goods throughout the state. And through our experience with new modes of ground transportation, we know that there will be unexpected issues and situations that arise, which is why I'm really glad to have this conversation here today with different layers of government, because we're gonna have to either coordinate or really just have open lines of communication on decisions made and actions taken. And so with that, I look forward to the rest of our discussion.
Lori, thank you. And so Raquel, I just want to ask you, do you want to talk a little bit more about what the FAA is doing, or do you want to do it in the context of some of the questions that, are there some things you want to say ahead of time before we?
Yeah, let me cover a little bit of it, you know, to sort of help. It may be obvious, but it probably doesn't hurt to mention. So for the FAA, our first and primary role is safety. That is our end all and be all. There are lots of other things that are involved, but absolutely number one is the safe integration of any activity in the airspace. And as part of that, of course, efficiency is part of the discussion, and sustainability. There's lots of other things that go into it, but you know, always number one is safety. And the agency has been integrating new technologies into the airspace since the agency got started in 1958. So there's always been new things coming down the pipe, and so we're quite used to it these days. You know, we talked a lot about drones. We've got commercial space transportation. We've got new technologies for commercial and general aviation aircraft. We are also working on, of course, advanced air mobility and supersonic aircraft as well. So there's a lot going on in our agency, and I think when our focus is on safety and on the current operations, you know, the pie is only so big, and we're constantly trying to make sure that we are doing everything to kind of meet all of our stakeholders' needs, but sometimes it is quite the balancing act. So, okay, what are we doing for advanced air mobility? So our goal is to maintain the same high level of safety that we currently are experiencing in commercial aviation. We are so proud of our safety record in commercial aviation. We think that is, you know, we've done a lot to get here. So our role, and I'd like to say that we are on our way to doing this, is of course we are certifying aircraft. We are finalizing the operational framework in which AM will be operating, whether that's pilot qualifications and training, for example. And we're doing a lot of work integrating, or work towards integrating advanced air mobility into the aviation system. So we're not just talking about the airspace, that's an obvious one, but there's vertiports, other industries, of course, communities, that's a big piece of it, and the international community as well. And so we're doing our part to be ready when industry is ready, right? So we're sort of working alongside everybody in the process. And I did want to note that, you know, the FAA is actually a service provider. We serve the community that uses the airspace. And so that means we don't make the decisions on what kinds of aircraft are operating the system. We don't make the decisions on where aircraft take off and land or where the aircraft are going to. Those are sort of more of the business decisions that are made. We are serving the communities. We are serving the operators. We are serving the demand. And so I think it's important to make that make that clear. And as for communities, I think that, again, we heard a little bit of conversation here where, some communities may decide that they want a vertiport. That is not the FAA making that decision. It is the communities, the leaders, who are making that decision. And similarly, it is the operators who are deciding where and when and how they want to operate. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm sure we'll have more opportunities to discuss later. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, let's start off just kind of an open question to all of you. When we think about adding this third dimension, adding aviation into a transportation system, we know we got here because, as I mentioned yesterday, this is a technology push. We have this convergence of technologies that have enabled the development of these new aircraft. So now's our opportunity to look at that technology and say, what could we do with that? And so I want to throw out to all of you, what are the opportunities that we might have with this new form of a mode of transportation? And what are some of the considerations that we might need to make as we add aviation, a mode that to date has operated quite separately from other modes in the transportation world? When we mix that in, what do we have to think about? So kind of very broad question. You want to start, Sarasina?
I can start with that. So for those of you that don't know the AAM Coordination Leadership Act, it was pushed primarily by industry to have a whole of government approach. So we have about 15 to 20 other agencies involved, because not just that AAM is a new mode, but it requires infrastructure, as Raquel had mentioned, vertiports. These have never been there before, but it's also the electrification piece where Department of Energy is involved. And as a lot of you know, there's a big push for electrification. Under my office, we're also looking at the National EV Infrastructure Bill that has now gone to the states to implement, where they want cars to be, especially in California, you can't buy an electric car. You have to buy an electric car by 2035. We're not going to be able to buy gas cars. So there's push for electrification. Now with AM, that's a needed, also, energy. It needs electrification. So there's and then there's trucks, and we're hearing, trucks are going to be electrified. So there's all this push for electrification, and with the AM IWG, we broke it up into groups and how we're looking at it. Automation, infrastructure, Air Traffic Federation. There's also new air traffic services. Those of you that worked in the drone world, there's UTM, because the original air traffic system was airport to airport, and this whole low altitude area is a new area that needs to be managed. And then finally, but not last, and it's where the rubber meets the road, is here at the communities, because the FAA can certify these aircraft. I think Joby is up for certification by next year, but it's the communities that are going to allow them to be flying in their area. And that's where we see, when we issued the request for information to all our stakeholders, we had about 12 stakeholder groups from industry, manufacturers, state, local, tribal governments, community associations, the community. We had electric utilities. We got 467 comments. 67 responses. CAMI also sent one in. I think California, NASAO, a lot of the organizations sent them in. And the number one thing was about public trust and community engagement, and that's a big requirement. And then we had about 100 comments from LA district that said no need for greed, and they were very vocal about this. So many of them want us to look at public benefit use cases, such as rural access first, emergency response. Can we gain the public's trust and see the safety case for these new AM vehicles with that crawl, walk, run, but specifically with that public acceptance? So I feel there's a lot of opportunities within the communities. What we see is those communities that don't have a hub, like here in Monterey, they see these large economic benefits. But in some other communities that have not seen those benefits, they're less reluctant to accept that. So we need to show, in order for this industry to scale, those larger public benefits of this new technology, because it's a push. We call it a push technology, meaning the industry is pushing for this to get out. There's no pull right now. And so we'll get the pull when people see the benefits of it.
Raquel, Lori?
But on that, just because I think there's a good tie-in, I know that throughout this conference, we've already talked a bit about engaging with the communities. I think earlier today we had one view that said, why are we even bothering, because the benefits will be obvious. But as Sarasina noted, this is available for public view. If you look at the website for the request for information that the department put out for AAM, there are hundreds of comments associated with community members who do not want advanced air mobility. They might not even know what it is, but they're starting out from no. And so whereas we know that there will be a lot of folks who will embrace it, unfortunately, the vocal folks are the ones that industry will need to engage with. And I guess I'm kind of curious from the audience, how many here are from industry? Whether it's an operator, manufacturer, yeah, okay, thank you. Well, I'm looking to you to encourage you to have meaningful conversations with the communities, and what I mean by that is not the ones who already like you. There are definitely folks who are concerned. And so I think having a meaningful engagement with them, and yesterday we heard from, the community members, from the local agricultural folks, Mujeres en Acción. I mean, they gave us some really good input on how we could engage with them. And I think I certainly took that to heart. I'm hoping that we all, as folks who are working in this new and exciting area, that we take the time and we make the effort. I think Matt earlier today was talking about how you have to be intentional in those conversations. I absolutely agree with that. And by the way, I also was happy to hear from Marina Airport that, yes, they also talked about how important it was. And we talked about airports a lot, and the fact that, we have a lot of underutilized airports. Those airport directors know their communities very well. And so I would certainly encourage industry who are not necessarily working with the airports to leverage that knowledge. Those airport operators, we work with them all the time. And when a complaint comes to my office, and believe me, I get a lot of complaints, what we do is we work with the airport and say, hey, are you hearing the same thing? What is this issue? How can we work on this together? And I think that that's, incumbent upon all of us, but especially, it shouldn't be lip service. It shouldn't just be like, oh yeah, we're engaging, maybe sometimes in quotes. No, I think we really, those in the audience who are planning on operating over these communities, they will really want and need to hear from you so that they can understand what you're bringing to the table. So it's not just the value proposition, because I think it's true. The value proposition is an important part of the messaging, but what are you going to do to become good neighbors, to be listening to what they have to say, and to take that into account in your operations? So just offering that. Thanks.
And to just give a couple of examples here in California where we have had a couple of pilots and demonstration projects based on goods delivery, what I noticed was the companies who were doing those, they went into the community, they sponsored community days, they let people look at the actual drones that would be delivering goods, people signed up, and what they have told me is that from beginning to end of the projects was like night and day. Once people could see and feel it and talk to the people who are actually operating these drones, it really made a difference. And so I think that will also translate to movement of people. But the fact that when, you know, these companies first went in and people said, no, get away, don't want to talk to you, and they stayed in the community, and they had people in the community who were part of their company who went to community meetings and not just come to us, they went to where people were. So whether that, you know, and this is based on my campaign experience of, you know, we went to high school football games, we went to, right, where people already were, grocery stores, what have you, not just expect the people to come to them. And I think that is also just a really important piece of what community engagement really has come to mean, is not just expecting the community members to go out of their way to find you, you go out of your way to find them.
So sticking with the theme of community engagement, one of the pieces we talked about yesterday, I want to bring that back up, and that is this idea of engaging the general public, as you were just talking about, and engaging other local stakeholders. So I'd love to hear from each of you how you see the roles of the different stakeholders, and where does this start? Does this start with a particular operator or OEM going to the general public in their town? Does it start with going to local elected officials, going to local planners? Does it start from a higher government level and go down to local levels? Certainly this is the work that CAMI does, is to develop a lot of the stakeholder engagement strategies and materials, and looking at this at a transportation system level, but that's not necessarily what a particular OEM or operator would do. And of course it's not just one and not the other, it's a combination, but I'd love to know if any of you have more thoughts on kind of those different approaches of stakeholder and community engagement, and where it initiates and how it develops.
So I'm happy to jump in. I think I mentioned this during my opening comments that we really do need to take the integration of other emerging modes of transportation and learn from how they were integrated. What are the lessons learned? What were the best practices? And from my personal point of view, the best practices are the ones that go into the community, say this is the service or this is the product we're offering you, this is how we want to do it. I understand, you know, they have to get their permitting and all that stuff as well, but as far as like really making a push, have it start from kind of the local governments, the local transit agencies. How are you going to connect people with other people or people with their destinations in general? How are you going to connect goods delivery to people? Are you going to go straight to their door, or are you going to go to maybe a local, you know, speaking about potential benefits for our rural friends and neighbors, are you going to go to maybe a central location that's a lot closer than it would be if it was just from, you know, the ports or the warehouse? So I think it's really kind of getting in and saying, okay, what are the problems that you are trying to solve, community, and how can our service or product really be a part of that solution?
Raquel, do you want? I can speak from the national strategy and plan. We had 12 different types of stakeholder groups. State, local, and tribal governments was one of them. And, you know, most of the comments were from communities. And I think, you know, absolutely there needs to be an engagement plan. But what we hear from the responses is that most of the planner, they can't visualize this integrating into a multimodal transportation system, and most people don't even know what AAM is or what it can do. And so there does need to be a lot of public outreach and all that. But as far as and that was the main issue with LA, because they had heard that these things are gonna fly in 2028. So there was this whole area around LA that was really vocal about not wanting these AM, and they only saw it as a transport for the rich. And so that's when the use cases come into play. Is this only going to be an air taxi service? Can we start out with the public benefit use cases to get the early adoption? And again, some communities aren't fit for an urban air mobility environment. We did original studies like in Boston, and there's a lot of communities that are like Dallas, Fort Worth, that are spread out, and they fit that economic benefit, and those OEMs and manufacturers see that, and they're actually leaning in from also the multimodal integration. They're doing both rural access into tribal governments and trucks that are going AV, because they may not have a really good multimodal system like a Boston that then sees AAM as competing with some of their new infrastructure like light rail. So every community, what we see is different. And that's when, I used to have this thing where if you go to one airport, you've gone to one airport, or if you've gone to one air traffic tower, you've gone to one air traffic tower. It's the same thing with communities. Every community has different needs, and whether they understand it and want to adopt the technology and see themselves as a hub like Monterey Bay because they see it. A lot of communities don't even realize that, with the noise, the low noise is one of the benefits of this technology. They still hear drones, and so again, it's that whole community engagement of getting them to understand, it's not the same as a helicopter flying over them. It's 10x less in noise. So again, every community is different, so that plan needs to be adopted for that community.
I think that to answer your question, I would think about it in a couple of different ways. If the operations are going to go in and out of an airport, I would actually suggest that you start the conversation with that airport, because that airport, as I already mentioned, knows their communities very well. There's a lot of airports that have community roundtables already, for example. And I can tell you that they're asking the FAA to address advanced air mobility with them. And I think that's a perfect opportunity for operators, vertiport, well, in the case of the airport, I guess that doesn't matter, but for operators to engage with those roundtables. So that's, I think, how I would suggest, because the airports, not only do they don't know their communities, but they also know the community leaders, both elected and non-elected. And so I think it really gives an opportunity to put together a nice coordinated strategy on how to be most successful in that. And we, the FAA, would always be supportive in terms of, what we do in our part for that. So that's for operations out of airports. If we're talking about a new vertiport in a new location, that's a different animal, and I think that's a more complicated one. And if in the beginning all of you are thinking about just flying from one airport to another, that makes it easy, but I'm guessing not, because I think that there are other market reasons why you would want to do something different. And so if you're talking about wanting to set it up, somebody is going to set up a new vertiport, then that really requires a much more deliberate, engaged, thoughtful way to figure out what is the right way, because you always want to start on the right foot, and trying to figure out what that first best step is, I think, to Sarasina's point, depends on the communities. But you have to be very savvy and understand what those communities that you're talking about. And so yes, I think talking to the local officials is a good place to start. You know, again, we, the FAA, if we know the communities, we are more than happy to share our knowledge and really kind of get the intelligence from the people, both the supporters and the detractors. I think that we learn a lot from knowing the folks who are against us, and we can try to figure out what are the pain points? What is it that they're so afraid of or concerned about? And is there something we can do to address that? So that's kind of how I would suggest from my perspective. Thanks.
Great. So it's a unique opportunity to have all three of you up here. So I have to ask the question, how, you've each talked about your particular agency and the work that they do. How do you see your roles vis-a-vis each other, and how, and I'd love to have your thoughts on how you see your different agencies working together to implement advanced air mobility, if you implement advanced air mobility.
I could start out with the national strategy, not just from the FAA side. We have a lot of FAA people on our AMIWG. I should actually say USDOT on it, because I'm not here to represent AMIWG, even though I'm on it. But so we have, this is, as I mentioned, a whole of government approach, but from the federal government's level, we, you know, with the FAA and the state, local DOTs, we understand this is, again, a new transportation system. It's an ability with electrification. As Lori said, this is a convergence of so many new technologies that we need to work together. No longer can and yes, if we're going from airport to airport, yes, we have that ability right now with initial operations. But then, you know, if we are moving to the vertiport and integrating to the multimodal, and all the other technologies like AI and ML that the AV world is, like in San Francisco, they're already having driverless cars. So I'm saying there's a complete difference between the surface world, which is self-certification, and the FAA, which is type certification. However, there's learnings on the safety of those technologies across the transportation modes. I do want to mention that, but we need to work together. There's a lot of things, you hear about AI everywhere. And I sat in, actually here in Monterey, we belong to one of the clubs here. Tom Friedman was speaking, and he calls this the Promethean age, a Promethean moment, meaning this shift to automation and autonomy. It's also going to change all of our jobs, even the FAA, even training pilots. We're thinking about reduced crew operations and unpiloted operations. So we also have to rethink from a whole of government approach. Department of Labor and Department of Education is involved, because this is a shift in all our lives, not just, this transportation system. It's a this new technology is shifting the way we work and even the way we think or do things. So that's, I encourage, even the RFI said we need to collaborate across all of government and communities, because some people are very scared. I mean, even like we had the pilots union as, one of our stakeholders, all trained, and they're like, well, why do you want to remove our jobs? Because American Airlines just got a 40% pay raise. Well, there's a pilot shortage, and also there's new rural access, so we're actually increasing jobs. So there's a lot more than just public engagement at communities. There's also this all of government. Well, what is this meaning, autonomy and everything else? And like I said, this really is truly a Promethean moment across all our transportation.
Sure. So ditto to everything Sarasina just said. Super important. I will say, through kind of the advisory panel that we did create, we are including other agencies and departments throughout the state as well. Some of them, you know, it's been interesting in talking to them about this and trying to explain how they would come in and actually help us figure out what our next steps might be. Because this is not something that has been on their radar. This is not something they've talked about. This is not something they've really even thought about. Sometimes transportation is not something they necessarily think about. I think the electrification piece and the grid capacity and stability is something that we talk about a lot in California, and something we need to continue talking about as well. And I also think from kind of the state's point of view, we look at, I think like I mentioned in my remarks, and I think Yolanka, you brought this up as well, we have a lot of cities throughout the state of California that could potentially benefit from advanced air mobility services, but they may not have the resources to actually figure out what those solutions might be to the problems that they're feeling. And so I see it partly as a state responsibility to really help them walk through whatever process it is, make sure they know what are the key questions they should be asking themselves, and trying to figure out what are the resources that we have at the state level that we can help these communities and these local governments work through figuring out what are those solutions that they may want to welcome into their communities, and what the solutions, what problems those solutions might apply to.
We're running out of time, but I wanted to note that this was a great opportunity in part because I got to meet Lori, and the point is federal, state, city, we all need to be working together. I don't know how much more we can emphasize that how critical it is, and it's not just, you know, the aviation people, but it is literally, as Sarasina said, all of the other agencies that have a stake in this area. And just to talk a little bit about some of the roles that we envision that we would be working with at the state and local levels, you know, land use decisions, licensing of vertiports, funding of infrastructure, system planning, electrification, public engagement, governance structures, multimodal. I mean, there's a lot. And so we really need to be talking to each other and working with each other as soon as possible. And I think the other thing that I would note is that standardization is probably something that industry would be interested in, because I can envision, or we can envision, each individual city or town or even state decide that there's a certain way they want to do things. And I do think that it's important for us to also try to work together to sort of come up with a way to standardize. And so I think this event and the folks who are involved in this are really critical to that conversation.
Great, thanks. I know we're at time, so I want to thank each of you for being here for this conversation, and thank all of you for being here. It's been an honor to get to moderate this panel. And Josh, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. I feel like that was too short, but. Yes. Thank you very much. Yes. I don't know who did that. I didn't do that. I'll do that now. DOT?
USDOT, because AMIWG, they have an engagement plan, which I was supposed to be